with Marion Hewitt this afternoon. We have got a fabulous presentation to share with you, and we have some networking after the session. We're just going to wait a few more minutes before we get started. So if you want to pop for a quick comfort break or grab yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, you've got 2 minutes to go and do that now. And then I will be taking you through the rules of the session today and handing over to Marion so that she can share all her pearls of wisdom around the self-care power plan. Okay, perfect. So everybody, I hope you're well today. I hope the heat isn't getting to you too much and that you're managing and coping to get through. As I've said, this is our day webinar, and we have the fantastic Marion joining us today. I'm just going to take you through some of the housekeeping and some of the rules that we have in place. So first of all, warm welcome to you all. It's fantastic to have you here all joining us. We would like to just remind you about the chat rules. So there's no keyboard warriors allowed, no self-promoting or selling your services, and please share your support and ask questions. We've got the fab Kirsty here on board. So Kirsty will be looking at the chat and will be able to respond back to any of your questions that we have in there. So our time today, we've got roughly 40 minutes to an hour with Marion. It's quite an interactive session, I believe, isn't it, Marion? So if time permits, we will carry on with it. And after that session, then we do have networking where we're going to send you off to breakout rooms so you can go and talk to everybody else that's here. The breakout rooms themselves, we're going to give you 20 to 25 minutes in each breakout room. So you'll have loads of time to be able to talk to other members about anything and to be able to share your information. When we do get to the networking session, I recommend that you have your LinkedIn open to make sure that you can connect and follow with everybody else that's in that room with you. So our guest speaker today is Marion. She is fantastic and fabulous, and I cannot wait to join the session. I'm literally itching to hand over so that I can sit down and enjoy what's going to be spoken about. So I'm going to hand over to Marion now. Please ask questions along the way. If you've got any concerns or anything else, please do put them into the chat. As I say, Kirsty will be looking after, and I will speak to you again at the end of Marion's session.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, welcome. I'm looking forward to spending this next time with you talking about the self-care and the importance of that. My professional background is HR. I now work as a coach, and I deliver a lot of mental health first aid, mental health awareness training, and also particular interest around positive psychology, so well-being. So this kind of brings in all my areas of interest, if you like. And I evolved this session recognizing, particularly over the last year, the challenges people have been experiencing. And, you know, there's more and more evidence of the importance of self-care, and so many examples where people are actually not making it a priority. We hear all the discussions, we hear all the data, we know that actually we need to do it. But actually, in reality, we know people don't make it a priority. So I'm going to use the chat quite a bit, so hopefully you'll feel able to participate in that. We've got select group here, which is lovely. So a real opportunity for you to all participate. So if I was to ask you the question, do you believe self-care is important? If you want to put your thoughts into that, yes, no, sometimes, maybe, possibly. What's your response? If yeah, is self-care important? Yeah. And if I was to then ask you the question, do you always make time for your self-care? Will I get the same level of answer? Which is usually pretty much what I get when I ask that question. And we know all the information that we know, the coach can't pour from an empty container, put your oxygen mask on first, and somehow that still doesn't always happen in practice. And if you find yourself, there's a selection of photographs here, do you recognize this version of yourself ever? And how do you feel when you are in this place? I mean, stress is the word that's there. Overwhelm is the word that comes to mind for me. But when you're in that place, what's happening? How resourceful are you? When that place of overwhelm, too many things, stress, can't make a decision, you know, how resourceful are you? And I know when I've allowed myself to get to that place, I can't think straight, I can't make decisions, I don't know where to start. And actually what we know is actually that fact, we can't. And looking at what is actually happening to our brain when we are in that state of threat response, which ultimately is what stress is. And remembering that stress isn't always about a negative. We tend to use it as a term as negative, but actually in reality, you know, it's a continuum. You can have eustress as a positive, distress as a negative, but stress as of itself isn't necessarily a negative. When we respond to something we perceive as a threat, we are releasing the cortisol around our body, and when that's going, that tells our body that we're in fight, flight or freeze response. And the part of the brain that then takes over is the amygdala, the oldest part, the fear center, because obviously that's about survival. So that it's totally logical that that's the bit that takes priority in terms of the functioning. But what happens is when that bit is taking over, we can't access the other parts of the brain that we do need to make a decision, to remember things, to prioritize, to do all the things that we want to be doing, to be accessing the coping strategies we need to move out of that fight response. So part of the challenge is when all these triggers are happening, the system in our body that was evolved to respond to, you know, physical danger, if you like, in the wild, actually we are using that as the same response as to whether, you know, a car's coming towards us at speed or whether we've got too many emails coming in. The body isn't yet differentiating. So, you know, things are really happening to our brain. And thinking about, you know, wanting to be healthy, thinking about having that self-care to get to that place of health. And health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being. And crucially, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. You know, don't consider myself healthy by default necessarily of just absence of being ill. Looking at actually how you can build health, which is where we think about the concept of well-being. And loads of information, loads of definitions for well-being. This is the one that particularly resonated with me for its simplicity and logic, if you like, modeled by Dodge. And she talks about the balance between the challenges we have to face and the resources we have available, so whether they're psychological, social or physical. And what we've seen in the last year is that most people have had challenges increase of some sort or another. I can't think anybody can have been totally immune to the last year. So at a time when our challenges are increasing, we should be putting our energy into replenishing our resources to maintain that balance. In reality, so many of us focus on how are we going to manage those challenges that we forget about the replenishment, with the result that we lose that balance of well-being. And if we were to consider the element of the psychological resources, the bits that we need to be functioning well, this is a model that I do particularly like. Say all these are from positive psychology areas of research, and Riff identified 4 elements necessary for psychological well-being, and part of the reason I'm going through these, albeit very rapidly, is that when we come a bit later to look at what would you put into your own self-care plan, think about things that you might do that will help you, if you like, tick the boxes of all the different factors, because it's the totality of these things that will help us with our overall well-being. So we can see the importance of self-acceptance. Are we kind to ourselves? That's linked to self-compassion. Is our inner voice a kind friend or a harsh critic? It's an area of particular interest around self-compassion. Positive relations, you'll see with all the models that you find for well-being, their positive relations of some sort comes in, that need for connection You know, it's why so many people have struggled with isolation, because we have missed that, which is absolutely imperative for our well-being. The opportunity for personal growth. You know, there's research around a growth mindset against a fixed mindset, and that, yeah, just the personal growth. Purpose in life, having something that is meaningful to you. As a coach, I work a lot with goals, and goals are really important to work towards. But from a lot of the well-being perspective, what's interesting is the working towards a goal actually has a greater impact on well-being than the actual achievement of it, which obviously gives you a momentary burst of positivity, but it's not an ongoing bit. The environmental mastery is looking at, you know, having the skills, the knowledge to do what we need to do. So in our work sphere, it's about have we got the skills and the knowledge to do our job competently. And then the last one here is about autonomy. You know, what level of autonomy, freedom, decision making do we have? And a lot of these, you know, they're different levels. It means different things to different people. You know, I know from my time in sort of corporate world, probably where I work, you know, my own business now, I like autonomy. I don't like being micromanaged. You know, I want the opportunity to work in the way that works, but knowing where I'm going. So it works differently for different people, but they're all important elements for psychological well-being. And this model, which I love the word flourishing as a, you know, an optimal state of well-being. It's getting towards, you know, a place beyond well-being as a balance. And this PERMA model comes from Martin Seligman, sort of the father of the positive psychology movement, if you like. And you'll see from this that there are some similarities to the model we've already looked at, that the positive emotions, that feeling good, having engagement, so that finding flow, you know, that feeling when you are so wrapped up in something, anything could be going on around you and you wouldn't notice. Again, you can see the need for relationships, but the authenticity in connections, the connections where you can actually be yourself in the interaction with people. And then, as we've seen with the other one, having meaning and purpose is important to our functioning. Achievement, having that sense of accomplishment. And then a few years ago, McQuaid and Kern added up the sixth pillar, which is about health, saying that you can't actually flourish unless you've got physical health as well. And just the last model I wanted to share is probably the most well-known, if you like, of all of them. 5 Ways to Wellbeing. This is from research by the New Economics Foundation, and they spoke and researched people that describe themselves as having a positive level of well-being and identified the themes. And they found, again, connection. They found the need to be active, and you know, that's whatever it means to people. It doesn't mean sign yourself up for the gym 4 times a week if that's your idea of health. You know, what activity works for you in terms of what you like and your levels of fitness, but having that activity, getting the endorphins going. The taking notice. How often are we just so caught up in the busyness of being busy, we actually just don't take notice? How many of us are guilty of grabbing something to eat at lunchtime and eat it at our desk while we're reading our emails, rather than actually, you know, taking time to appreciate it, or dashing from A to B without noticing, you know, what season we're in, what the day's like, and just to appreciate the being curious, the being in the moment. The keep learning. This doesn't need to be any major learning. It may be something as simple as trying a new food or watching a documentary, or it could be. And the last element is around giving. We know it's lovely if somebody does give something to us, does something nice for us, but from a wellbeing perspective, actually the value of the person doing the giving is equally good. It's why people get so much out of volunteering. Because of that sense of doing something for other people. So you've seen a number of different threads that we can see we need to make sure we are putting some attention to when we are looking at our self-care, when we are looking at replenishing our resources for our well-being or for our flourishing, for our place of optimal performance. So that is the basic background behind it. But what we also know is, you know, just as when people build up negative emotions, it can potentially lead to depression. If we are focusing on building those positive emotions as an outcome of, you know, the positive effect from getting the psychological well-being and putting our efforts into the areas that we need, it will actually characterize optimal and promote optimal functioning. One of the other models for Fredrickson is the broaden and build. You know, the more positive emotions you can build, the more your resources you'll build in the upward spiral, which makes perfect sense. And if we're building those positive emotions, these are the resources that we are replenishing with the ongoing impact. So I can't think people are going to argue with actually benefiting from having increased resources in all of those areas. And we have an element of control on that. We have more control over it than we may think if we look at how we are looking after ourselves, the practice of self-care to actually remain healthy and resilient. And I guess actually the fact you're here, most of you, you will already recognise that looking after ourselves and our resilience and our well-being is important, but actually we're still not very good at doing it. So what are the obstacles to that? That's, you know, might wonder where it is. That's Bournemouth Beach, which is not how it looks now. That was how it looked in lockdown last year. It's a few more people on it at the moment. But, you know, what are the obstacles? And I'd like if we can use the chat again and actually think about, in fact, I'm going to take my screen down for a minute. I don't know how many people. It'd be nice if you can put your camera on if you're happy to do so. But what gets in the way? If we use the chat, won't put you into rooms at the moment, but either use the chat or just feel comfortable to say what gets in the way of you doing what you know you should be doing for your self-care.
I think for me, Marion, it's a lack of self-control, because I seem to book out my day and book out my time doing what's right and that needs to be done. But actually, at the end of the day, I sit and go, oh, what, you know, so there's often days when I find that I haven't taken a lunch break because I've sat and gone, oh, I need to get this done, I need to get that done. So I think I'm my own worst enemy in my case.
I mean, time, I can see Kirsty put time in that. Time is something that people often say, and I recognise for a lot of people, time is a very real obstacle. I don't know what people's worlds are like, you know, people that have been juggling over the last year, homeschooling, other responsibilities, trying to work from home. You know, time is a factor. Obligation to others, absolutely. And if it doesn't get scheduled, yes. And one of the things I often suggest to people, if you're in a work environment and your manager was to say to you, oh, could you just do this for me by the end of the day? It will only take 10 minutes, but I don't want you to stay any later. Most of us would find a way to use our time a bit more efficiently to achieve that. If you were to set yourself the challenge of taking a 10-minute break before the end of the day without staying any later, I bet the percentage of people that would manage it would be lower. So some of it is about we are not making it part of our routine. We're not making it a priority. And I know my own experience is if the days when I feel I'm on a flow and I'm not going to take a break at lunchtime, I'll just keep going. It might feel okay in the moment, but by mid-afternoon I'll have flagged, and overall my productivity will actually be less than if I've taken a proper break and come back refreshed. Yeah, setting boundaries on interruptions. Alison said, absolutely. You know, some of the things that are in our control, we're actually not taking control over. Also, what I hear quite a lot, which is kind of linked to Tamsin's mentioned, the obligation to others. Certainly, there's a cultural element of that sense of guilt, the feeling that we should put the other people first, and if we're putting ourselves first, we are being selfish. And I'm absolutely not advocating that we put ourselves above everything else and, you know, ignore anything else that's going on at all. But what I'm actually what I do recognise in myself is if I don't take the time to look after myself, I will not have the resources to do what I want to do to support other people. I stress this all the time when I'm doing the mental health first aid training. You can't support other people if you are not looking after yourself. The self-care is absolutely adamant. Just looking at some of the comments, yes, it's how, you know, how do we create that validity? How do we make it feel important enough in our time to actually make it something that we will do? And, you know, we already know the benefits of doing that. We know the drawbacks of not doing it. So why aren't we doing more about it? So let me just go back to my screen. And what I'd like you to think about now is a time when you have felt the best version of yourself. And that can be in whatever environment you want to choose. That may have been a time when everything was peaceful and quiet. It may have felt a time when you were just having fun. It may have been a time of competition. Just some time that, ideally a particular time that you can reflect upon, where you remember thinking, actually, this is a good version of me. This is when I'm at my most resourceful. And I'd like you to think about that time for a moment and really try and get yourself into that place in that time. And then I'd like you to identify 3 words to describe yourself in that time. And these words will be totally unique to you. I usually get a wonderful array of words. If you're comfortable, it's great if you're happy to share your 3 words in the chat, just to see what people say. Obviously, there's no right or wrong on this, but just take a moment to think about, when I'm the best version of myself, when I'm my most resourceful version, how am I feeling? Just give you a moment to think about that. Calm, relaxed and happy, yeah? Calm, chilled and happy, yeah. It's always interesting. There's always, a real variation between, people that feel that in a calm way, when they feel that in a highly energized way, but just different mixes of words. But if you're thinking, hold on to that place when you were that most resourceful version of yourself. And if you think about that version of yourself, how much more do you feel able to do? How much more patience do you feel that you have? How much more energy do you feel that you have? How much enjoyment do you have in what you're doing? Think of all the benefits that you have when you are in that place. And if you reflect on that state and how, obviously, realistically, we are never going to be in that state all the time, that, we just can't do it. But actually, and arguably we wouldn't appreciate it if we were, but actually, if we could look after ourselves to spend slightly more of our time in that place, how much more would we achieve if that's what we're enjoying? Well, how much more would we just enjoy being in the moment because we've switched off from obligations? What would be the outcomes? What would be the benefits from doing that? So if you, really think about that, as if you're still needing reasons to convince yourself that actually putting time into looking after yourself is really time well spent. So now I would like us to think about, actually, what would this self-care plan look like? If you remember, we have got the different headings from the models that we've looked at. But if we think about these headings, and if you've got a piece of paper nearby, if you want to just write down these 5 headings, because in a little while we'll go into groups to give you an opportunity to think about your own plan and share ideas. So these were just sort of a dump of ideas that might be under each one. So on the physical, what might you do? Just sometimes just stretching. If you've been at the desk for a long time, do you stretch? If you've got, we were talking a bit earlier just before we get started about, back-to-back meetings, just even within those, can you take a few moments to stretch or a few deep breaths? Walking, exercise, sport. Exercise and sport are definitely my default self-care things. Looking at your diet, how you're looking after your body that way. Yoga and sleep. Sleep is so undervalued and under-recognised in terms of well-being. If any of you have come across the work of Matthew Walker, who's sort of the lead researcher into sleep, it's about so much more than just recharging our battery. But when we are feeling stretched, what's one of our default mechanisms? We'll work harder, we'll sleep less, which actually really is counterproductive. Just think how you feel just the morning after a bad night's sleep, if you need a convincer. but his work, Matthew Walker's work, is definitely worth a look at. Or there was a podcast that he did with Chris Evans a while ago that was worth listening to. The emotional side, sometimes just chatting to a friend or just spending time on something that you enjoy doing, decluttering. I know that's something that I resort to if I'm feeling things are overwhelming. I just tidy up and clear my desk and feel things are in order. Ask for help if you need it. Practice self-compassion, to be kind to yourself. Then on the social side, self-care is not something you need to do in isolation, but what interaction can you have with family and friends? Fortunately, we're now able to be doing that a little more, but it's something we've all been, perhaps we can all value more than we did to things that we used to take for granted. We now weren't in the same way, but social media, gets a lot of bad press, but actually there is a lot of force for good in terms of the connections you can make on social media. Just don't rely on them for all your authentic connections. The spiritual side, looking at this from whatever angle means to you. It's that self-compassion, whether you recharge on your own. I live on the coast, and actually for me, just looking out to sea, just being on the cliff top and looking out is what does it to me. I can see the comments Richard's made about sleep. So absolutely, people just don't value it enough, and we're still only at the early stages, I think, of really understanding everything that happens in sleep. Certainly in terms of people's wider mental health and processing trauma and things. And then the work side, looking at some of the things here that are much more in our control than we sometimes give ourselves the realization, if you like. Are we putting boundaries around how we work? Are we taking a break? Are we saying no? Are we planning our time? Are we asking for help? We've seen so much where people have, they've got the laptop on one side of the kitchen and they're cooking dinner on the other, and they're checking emails at the same time. Whereas we didn't do that when we had that disconnect and we were traveling. But, some people are enjoying working at home, but they just need to put in some more sensible, productive boundaries for themselves so they can have that disconnect. And then let's think about time. Frequently, people talk about time as being the challenge, and for many people, it absolutely is. So let's think about what can we do in terms of those different time categories. So again, if you could write those different categories down. If you just got a couple of minutes, for me, I'll just go make another cup of tea. If I go and sit outside with it for a few minutes, even better. Again, just those few deep breaths, just in terms of the stress response. Actually, those breathing, it helps, it gets the message to your brain that you're actually not in a threat place. If you ever come across the stress container and the idea of the tap and the coping strategies to let some of that stress out, just a few deep breaths. Send a message to a friend. Start like that, looking. 20 minutes, you might just go for a walk, power nap. 20 minutes is apparently the optimal time for a nap. Any more than that, and we would go into a deeper sleep, which then doesn't feel so good when you come out of it. Meditation, if you've got an hour, what do you like doing? Or what can you disconnect from? Switch off technology. Challenge your relationship with your phone. If most phones have the data and tell you how many times you pick it up in a day, and it's usually quite scary. So actually, just disconnect. If you've got a whole day, spend time doing something. Spend time with friends. Self-care is not something you need to do on your own, as I said, but what would you do? And when I say no time constraints, I'm not meaning that you suddenly have nothing else to do, you're leading a life of leisure, but what's on your one day when I have time list, and what might you just start to do in small amounts? So what I'm going to do now is to give you an opportunity to think about that a bit and to work out what you might put in your own plan. So if I put you into a couple of groups and give you 10 minutes to have a chat, build up a list of ideas. This isn't about a big plan. I'm not suggesting that you're going to set yourself up a detailed plan of major life changes. This is about giving yourself some time to think about what might I be able to do differently in small steps that will help replenish my resources. So I'm going to just put you into a couple of groups. So hopefully there'll be 4 of you, and I hope those of you that have not got cameras on will be comfortable to be chatting with people once you get into the room. So 10 minutes in 2 groups, just think about all the things that you might put under those 2 categories that you could draw upon. Right, and I will see you back in 10 minutes. Welcome back. Is anybody willing to share anything that was discussed in their room? Or is everybody going to go quiet back in the room?
We discussed lots of things actually. We actually didn't. We got carried away and we didn't get through everything. So
that's fine. I'm more happy that you had a conversation. Discussion more relevant.
Yeah.
So what were you talking about?
We was going through the first 5 the different headings, and we all pretty much quite similar with the physical. We want to walk more, emotions, getting more sleep. We all had the kind of similar goals, so that was quite interesting. So that was main of our discussion.
Thank you. What other awareness did people obtain from the conversation discussion? Anybody want to share anything?
Yes, I still think that, and speaking hopefully in alignment with Christy and Richard, I think there was still a sense that we don't do enough of it. That there are challenges that we have, whether it's going to sleep, switching over your devices, that we all could do better, if you like, with self-care.
Yeah. Yes, and picking up on the word could, what is it that would make it change as into want to and will? What is there that still needs to be that convincer that makes you start to change the habits? And I totally believe it's not about trying to make major change. Don't set yourself up not to be able to do unrealistic things, but what small changes could you do? Is it about leaving your phone downstairs so you're not tempted to check emails the first minute you wake up, if that's something that you do that's not a sensible habit? Can you give yourself a cut-off time the last time you'll look at your emails or your social media in the day? How can you put in make sure that you take a break at lunchtime? What small habits can you create that make it easier to stick to it? Because I think that is part of the challenge.
We did do some of that. At least I didn't say should. I said could.
This is true. Thank you. Let me just bring to sort of the last bit I would like us to think about, and it follows on very much from what Tamsin was just saying. It's the accountability. How can we make ourselves accountable? We're sitting here, hopefully you're thinking, yes, I really should do that. But actually, how are you going to make yourself accountable? And you will know what will work for you. As in, are you somebody that needs to write it down? And if you put it on a list or in your diary, it will happen. Do you need to tell somebody else to check in on you? Do you need to put a reminder on your phone or a post-it on your kettle? Or give yourself a reward at the end of the week if you've done something? You know yourself what will actually help you make that change. So have a think about that yourself. Think about it for a moment. And then just to sort of draw it together, I'd like you to think about one action that you will commit to taking and how you can make yourself accountable for that one action that will start you on the process of making self-care a greater priority in your day. Let's take a moment to think about what that might be. If anybody wants to share it, either in the chat or in the group, that would be great, because if you speak it out loud or write it down, you're much more likely to do it. I can't offer to make you accountable to me, although you can if you want to on LinkedIn. But whatever works for you.
I think for me,
everybody got something? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's just nothing too big, but I think I was doing a lot of walking in lockdown, but since that kind of stopped, since we've come out, I've kind of reduced my walking again, and I found myself jumping in the car. I mean, I only live 10 minutes away from the village, so I think it's just kind of getting out walking more. Even if it's 10 minutes, it's 20 minutes. It's a 20-minute walk. So if I need to get something from the village, maybe walking instead of driving. And kind of making time for that, really, I think can be a good thing. And then just doing more exercise in general.
Yeah, Thank you. Because I think if you know that you feel better for it and you do it more often, that you feel the repeated benefits, then you've got more of an incentive to do it.
Absolutely. I think the battles I used to have with myself going to the gym, but when you kind of actually come out of it, when you kind of gone through that process and you kind of actually come out of it, I used to have to be so disciplined to do it, but when you actually come out, you feel so much better for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
And quite invigorated as well.
Yeah. And usually the less you feel like doing something, the greater the benefit you'll have felt by the end of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just about to say that.
Yeah. Anybody else like to share the action that they're going to commit to doing? Improve my sleep schedule. Yeah.
Yeah, I just
Sorry,
put
Alison?
I just put one in the chat, but I think it's actually having a whole piece of fruit each day, because I really enjoy it. But you just tend to go past it. Oh, I'll get that when I come back.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm quite good at berries and things, but actually having a whole piece of fruit.
Yeah. So you'll know you're looking yourself. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
I think one thing that I found, and I alluded to it earlier, I try and schedule things in my calendar for myself. So Thursday, I was meant to have a writing day just for myself. And I then look at it and somebody asks something of me and I think, oh, well, I can just do it on Thursday and I'll write some other time. And the problem with that is that, you know, part-time becomes no time if you just keep giving that away. So it's that saying no or saying I'm busy or can we do it next week? It's, you know, it's hard sometimes to think that your time is as valuable as everybody else's work time. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It reminds me that, you know, is it the Viktor Frankl phrase that between stimulus and response there's a space, and actually capturing that space and in that space making a choice rather than your default response is yes, I'll do that. Actually recognize what's your longer term purpose. There was something I was listening to the other day, you know, about habits and productivity, and it was like actually a lot of our barriers to productivity is we don't think deeply enough about it. We do the reflex action things rather than actually what do we really want to achieve and are we putting time in the right places. But that's heading slightly off at a tangent. So hopefully you've all got something that you are going to commit to as your action and will take away. So you have got your self-care plan. And if thinking about it, you know, if you were putting all your plans together, all your gifts, your thoughts, and you were wrapping it up, what would your self-care gift be to you? So take that, your action, as your gift to you for your self-care. So thank you. That hopefully has given you food for thought, things to reflect upon. If you're interested, we haven't done quite as many activities as there are opportunity to today, but if you want there's a short ebook that brings things together. If you just use that bit.ly link, you can request it. So bit.ly/self-care power hour. Those are my details if anyone's interested in connecting on LinkedIn. And just, I don't know who I've got in the audience in terms of what you do and what areas you're working in, but I'm about to start on some research in self-compassion in female HR professionals. So I'm looking for a few more volunteers for anybody that is either a member or fellow of CIPD and currently working in HR. So if anybody has anybody in their network or thinks that might be interested in that, then I would appreciate any help in recruitment. But that brings my session to a close. So thank you very much for participating in it. I hope you've found it useful. And can I hand back, please?